Back. While torrential rains continue to batter parts of South Africa, forcing people in low-lying areas to evacuate, the Pongolapoort Dam in northern KwaZulu-Natal, popularly known as Jozini, has reached full capacity. Now, water will now have to be released from it in accordance with the 85% dam safety operational rule. Surrounding communities have been warned of the high water volumes. So let's find out exactly what the water situation is in other provinces with Sputnik Ratau from the Water and Sanitation Department. Ratau, always a pleasure speaking to you. A very good morning. I mean, look, we've had extensive conversations, you and I, about how the water levels, I remember, I think was it last year or 2 years ago sometimes, had reached a capacity of 45%. Now we're talking about releasing water because it's above the 85% mark. So clearly, you know, on one side, it's about the depletion of water, but on the other side here, we're experiencing, I can imagine, an influx.
Absolutely. And when you look at the contrast between now and around September, October, you remember when the when the heat wave was at its height and no rains were coming down, we really had an issue about our dwindling dam levels. Now we've got the complete opposite, and within a couple of days to a couple of weeks, we have seen quite high inflows. We are continuing to see this. We know that some of our dams are already at around full capacity. As you correctly put it, you know, the Pongolapoort Dam, which is popularly known as Jozini, is already doing its annual releases, which are meant to ensure that the infrastructure is protected. But it is important as well, just to say that the safety of lives and livelihoods is quite paramount at this time.
Yeah. You know, as you're speaking about the safety of people, what happens when these dams, you know, can no longer contain the water? I think that becomes then a big problem around, do we have the adequate infrastructure to sustain, number one, the power that water flows with, and also potential overspills if we are to ever experience some?
The capacity that is built into the design is such that the dams are able to take care of that pressure up to certain levels. And once that has been reached, then, you know, our colleagues at dam management and our hydrological services colleagues who monitor, by the way, hourly, almost by the minute, the inflows into the dams and in the rivers themselves, then give advice as to whether we should be able to do releases and so on. And that is what guides us to reach those decisions. Therefore, in that as well is what we talk about when we talk about the releases. You know, there is always a song and dance when we open the gates at especially the Vaal Dam. At the moment, at the valve, for instance, where all the valves are open so that we can manage the inflows and we can see that rain keeps on coming. That has got an impact, obviously, downstream. And where we are with regards to Bloemhof is that we've already started releasing quite a good amount of water. By yesterday afternoon, we're releasing about 500 cubic meters of water per second, which is quite a big volume of water. And when we look at the issues around Northwest, you then have this contrast where you have some of the dams that are way above, you know, the normal level at this time, and yet you have others which are still below 45%. So that contrast is something that also needs to be looked at and managed, such that if there is a possibility of interbasin movement, that can happen. But at the moment, what we are looking at is just the amount of inflows that we are looking at, and therefore keeping an eye on exactly what needs to happen.
You know, I'm going to use this as an educational moment, Sputnik, about the releases. I mean, you keep speaking about the releases. Can you just expound to us and explain when the dam level reaches a certain capacity, right? So that over 85%, and then it needs to be released. Where does the water get released to?
Okay, the water normally gets released, for instance, if it's Pongolapoort, it gets released into the Pongolo River. And that river then ultimately flows to the ocean. When you look at the Vaal Orange system, when we release water from the Vaal Dam, it flows into the Vaal River. It flows towards Bloemhof. It flows into then you have the confluence of the Orange and the Vaal River in the Northern Cape, and that water flows towards Namibia, and ultimately it flows into the Atlantic. So in the ultimate, all not all, but some of those releases would ultimately end at where the water flows into the ocean, and others would then be within certain systems, be able to be kept within the basins. So it's different things that happen at different levels. And also just the fact that the dams are built such that although we can reach 100%, but we find that, for instance, the Vaal can go up to about 106, 110%, whereas the Harib, which is the biggest dam we have, can even go higher to about 120% of capacity. And also you look at the means of releasing that water also differs. When you look at the Harib, which uses just natural gravitation, it is different from the Vaal, where we use gates in order to release that water. So the different designs are also making an input as to how we then release that water.
Yeah, but also on the other side of it, it's around being able to take advantage of this rainy season. I think many South Africans, I'm sure you'd agree with me, are tired of always hearing that South Africa is water scarce and that we've got water shortages, and then now we have to implement some kind of water minimization contingency plan, and then people end up not having the right flow within their houses, and some households not having water at all because of these cuts that keep happening. How then do we start maximizing this type of rainfall so that we don't find ourselves where you guys as the Water and Sanitation Department have to release another press statement about how we are, we have experienced a shortage of water, we need to be able to make contingency, use water sparingly, not that we're not supposed to at all times, but being able to just be ahead of the curve this time around, instead of us always having to play catch up and always saying this narrative, South Africa is a water scarce place and. So how do we take advantage of the rainfall that we're experiencing right now?
You've just spoken like a proper Gautenger, Faith, that the water is there in the Vaal, in the integrated Vaal River system, and that is the expectation from South Africans. You are correct. And I think that is part of what we need to share out there as information. Remember that part of what we have to do as well, even in the management of these dams and the water flow and so on, is to also not deprive the environment of the natural water that it needs to be able to thrive. So part of that designs, by the way, includes how we then keep the environment also satisfied with water that it normally would have received if there were no dams in that locality or within that system. That's one reason. But the fact that South Africa is a water scarce country is not a matter that depends on how much rainfall we receive per season, because that is also seasonal, and at the moment, you know that due to climate change is very unpredictable. Therefore, it is about how much rainfall we receive in comparison to world average, and that is where the issue of water scarcity comes in. But the fact of the matter, and you are correct to raise the question as to how do we maximize the available resource as we see now. Part of what has happened is that we are now looking at, and that work has started, looking at where it is possible to look at interbasin transfers. And we do see that between the Utugela and the integrated Vaal River system, we do have that system happening. We are looking at that, for instance, in order to take care of the matters that are at hand, for instance, in the Gqeberha, Eastern Cape area, to look at the interbasin transfers and how we can be able to facilitate that. And probably the overflow or the spillage of the Harib Dam would bring a bit of comfort to the people in Gqeberha, because remember, we have initiated that flow of water from the Harib, which is in the Free State, right through to Gqeberha, and to supply water to the Nooitgedacht water treatment works. in order to be able to stabilize water availability in Gqeberha. So all of those things are things that we are looking at. For instance, the fact that the Western Cape is primarily a winter rainfall season area. How do we then, in the case where like this past season, they did not receive the rains as they did the past season? What happens when we have more rainfall and therefore more availability in other provinces? So those are discussions that are happening. When you look at the Olifants managed model that we have just initiated in Limpopo, it speaks to that as well as what we are doing around Loskop Dam.
Got you. We have to leave it there. Sputnik Ratau, always a pleasure speaking to you, Water and Sanitation Department spokesperson, just giving us the latest here when it comes to this influx of water that we're currently experiencing, as I said.